Here to talk about plastic innovation and what we can do to continue growing the plastic market whilst also making it more sustainable. So, who are we talking to you today? I'll be hosting the presentation. I'm Brian Balmer, and I manage our portfolio of published research for our chemicals, materials, and nutrition practice. My background is in chemistry. I've been with Frost & Sullivan for 25 years now, and polymers and composites is one of our core program areas. And we have analysts in our team working on a number of studies right now in this area. So I'll be presenting some of the latest findings from that research today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Anwesha Banerjee. Anwesha is a principal consultant in our chemicals team. So her primary role is in supporting clients through bespoke advisory engagements. She has 15 years of experience in the chemical industry and worked in manufacturing before joining us here in Frost & Sullivan. Her areas of expertise include petrochemicals, polymers, lubricants, and polyurethanes. Her contribution to today's discussion is based on a presentation she gave at the LDPE Industry Association's recent annual industry event, the Plant Improvement Conference organized by ThyssenKrupp. Anwesha and I are both based in the UK, although we are speaking to you from their different locations today. I am still in the UK. I'm working from home. It's 34 degrees and we have no air conditioning, so it's very hot here. So I do apologize if I look a little bit overheated at some point, but on with the presentation today. So what are we going to talk about? We'll break down the presentation into three sections. We'll look a little bit at some supply issues for polymers, technology developments in polymer production, which Anwesha will lead, and then she will hand over to me, and I'll have a look at some demand trends for polymers from that research that we have been working on in our team. And then we'll just finish with an open discussion between us about circularity, as we hope the future for the industry. And my apologies, I've just realized I left on the subtitle from our previous webinar, which was about soil health. So I will get that fixed before we share the slides with everybody. But nevertheless, we will be talking about circularity at the end of the presentation today. But the first thing we want to talk about is some supply and polymer production technology developments. So Anwesha, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome, a big welcome to the audience here today. I'm going to first talk about, this is one of the slides that I presented in the ThyssenKrupp LDPE conference. This talks about LDPE supply situation and focusing more on China. When we look at the polymer supply today, a lot of regionalization has happened in the last few years in terms of growing capacities in regions of demand and in regions where the demand has been fast growing. So a lot of capacities have been upcoming in Asia. When we look at LDPE and specifically in China, we are focusing in China because a lot of capacities have been ramping up in China specifically. If you just look at the last few years, just only in 2024, there was about a planned capacity of 3.8 million tons of PE, out of which about 1.9 million tons came online. And the latest one being ExxonMobil's new petrochemical complex in the Guangdong province, and that includes a 500 KT LDPE unit as well. The facility began its operations in early 2025. So that's a big one. A lot of these capacities have actually been coming up in China just in response to the demand surge that has been happening in the domestic Chinese market. And that is definitely led, massively by China's e-commerce. That's kind of pulling the packaging demand. But also, if you look at the sustainability regulations, which are kind of emerging in China, there's a lot of focus on visible pollution rather than, material restrictions. And that has allowed the growth of LDPE in the market. And to meet this demand, there has been these capacity additions. Now, in the next 2 years, if we just look at the planned capacities that are kind of planned to come up, while the demand is expected to grow, the supply growth is expected to surpass the demand, and that is kind of going to lead to an oversupply situation in China in just 2 years, or just 1.5 years. And that is definitely going to have a major impact on the global trade dynamics, on the global costs of polymers, especially LDP and related polymers. And what will the major manufacturers, the Western manufacturers, or the European based manufacturers do is something that we'll have to wait and see, because I think a lot of manufacturers will now look at how to differentiate in the market, how to create more innovative products, look at recyclates and things like that. But in short, there will be a major impact on the trade, and there will be a major impact on the cost of the prices of polymers. In short, back to the China story, Chinese players have been looking at self-sufficiency in the last few years, and as result of that, a lot of the manufacturers that have been putting up new plants in China, they're coming up with somehow some customized and flexible plants that can accommodate multiple products. So EVA with LDP is an example. EVA's demand has been surging due to the demand in solar panels and also in footwear. So that's something that has been, a key trend in the market that we see, is that flexible plants with swinging capacities. That has been happening. And also, a lot of manufacturers are now looking at technology advancements, tweaks in the technologies to incorporate those specialty grades, especially to meet the demand in the medical industry. And that is something, also a strategy to reduce the imports of these specialized grades in China. So that's been happening as well. Also, there is an effort to kind of integrate the circular feedstocks in the ongoing and the new lines. So we would definitely see a lot of investments in the recycling space as well. So recycling infrastructure and the integration with the conventional units is something that's going to happen as well in China. So this is, in short, the Chinese story, but definitely the oversupply situation, especially in LDP, is definitely going to have an impact on the global trade, and it's going to impact the global manufacturers as well. Moving on to the next part of it, when we look at the supply, so what are the manufacturers, and what's there for the OEMs, what are they doing, and what's imperative for them to do? The first thing is that a lot of consumers today, a lot of brand owners today, are kind of asking for ISCC plus certified resins, which has become very important, especially in Europe and in North America. So a kind of retrofits in the conventional lines, kind of tweaks in the lines to accommodate these recycled content or recycled material, that's going to grow, and that is on the OEMs. That's a big opportunity for the OEMs, and they are working with manufacturers to meet this kind of demand, because consumers are kind of constantly asking for at least 30 to 50% recycled content in their products. Converters are asking for that. Consumers, the very end consumers, are actually asking for supply chain transparencies, so that's growing a lot in the market. Of course, that is additional costs, but then that is very important to stay competitive in the market, especially in Europe and North America. A lot of new initiatives as well that we see today includes from the big companies like Chevron Phillips, Sabic, Honeywell, that have started about 100 kt per year or so pyrolysis oil plants feeding the LDP and LLDP waste into the steam crackers for the circular ethylene. So that's something that is growing as well. Apart from that, there are other companies, some startups, some smaller companies, but some also mid-sized companies that are providing recycled products which are almost the virgin quality. Like, for example, APK's new cycling, which is a selective solvent dissolution, is producing about almost virgin quality LDP for the multi-layer film applications. And this is at a commercial scale in Germany, around 40 kt per year. So this is something that's growing as well. Apart from that, for the OEMs, there's also opportunities to kind of work on the energy consumption part of it, because specifically when we look at LDP, a lot of the production is very energy intensive, and it is associated with high energy costs, carbon taxes, that has been kind of raising the cost for the manufacturers as well. A lot of manufacturers today are incorporating variable speed drives, heat recovery systems, process electrification options to kind of reduce the energy intensity. And manufacturers are implementing these technologies and also documenting their savings, which they are passing on to the consumers as well. So it's all well documented and part of the value chain. That's something that is important as well. And then in the medical field, especially, manufacturers are kind of gradually adopting more precision technologies. So, to meet the standards of ISO 10993 and similar standards, 0.5% of property tolerances and things like that. So, precision technologies have become very important. So, that's something that is coming in as well, and that is also allowing manufacturers to sell the products, the grades which are 30 to 40% higher price than the conventional products. So that's growing as well. And finally, we do see a lot of this in the Middle East region, localization policies that are kind of driving the capacities locally. So local capacities that are smaller, not those mega size plants, but yeah, project size would be smaller in that case. But then it's also kind of many projects that are coming up, just small size projects in pockets of high demand, like Middle East, Saudi Arabia, pockets of Asia, where all these country visions, etc., are kind of trying to integrate the value chains, and we do see some upcoming capacities there. So that's in for the manufacturers and the OEMs. Uh, and then moving on, we do see supply increasing, especially in China, for example, that is going to flood the market as well. But where is the material going to grow? So this kind of really shows a very good growth dynamics of all the end applications. Of course, packaging is the largest contributor in this market and continues to grow and be the biggest application in this case for LDPE. But the higher growth that we see today is in uh, some of the other applications, and that includes healthcare, electricals, electronics, which are kind of growing faster in terms of LDP consumption compared to packaging. And specifically, when we talk about healthcare, the value growth in this industry when it comes to polymer usage is actually disproportionately high than the volume growth. So that's also a big opportunity for the manufacturers. A lot of manufacturers today are therefore, you know, revisiting their portfolio and thinking about portfolio optimization, trying to figure out, you know, which are the products, grades, and which are the applications that they should target and which ones should be phased out. So that's something that's happening as well. And in within packaging, of course, and in consumer products, there will be sustained growth, but there will also be a lot of sustainable product initiatives. So in packaging, for example, it will be driven by e-commerce, food preservations. There'll be a steady growth in film applications, in the consumer products, in greenhouse, mulching, etc., and construction industries in the developing, region, especially. But yeah, overall, it continues to grow well. But then the very specialty grades and the very fast growing applications would be healthcare, electricals, and electronics, at least in the next few years. That's what we see. So yeah, that's a very good understanding from our end on how these applications will grow. And then I just hand over to Brian for the next part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Anwesha. So, um, move on. So, yeah, obviously, I'll pick up on what you've just been saying and take a look more broadly now at demand trends for polymers and whether there are markets that will grow and provide an outlet for the higher volumes of material that we'll be seeing coming to the market, as you said there. And the pie charts I've got on here are just to begin that discussion and to provide a bit of context. As the first chart on the left shows, packaging is the largest single application of polymers overall. So whilst Anwisha on the previous slide was showing some really nice opportunities for growth for LDPE outside of the packaging space, in absolute volume terms, growing demand for packaging will remain the number one driver for overall growth in polymer consumption. And when polymers are used to make packaging, the majority today is still clearly made from virgin materials, but that is where the market is changing the most. And as you can see in the central pie chart, it's still virgin plastic, 95% of the market. But the alternative raw materials, whether it be PCR, post-consumer recyclate, or bio-based polymers, will become much more important in the future. And we'll take a look at some of those trends in more detail in the coming slides. But first, as a little bar chart in the bottom right here shows, when polymers are used in packaging, the first way in which we often segment that is into rigid versus flexible. So what we'll do first is look at rigids. And we released our last report on polymers in rigid packaging about this time last year. And if we look at the numbers, the 38% that you can see in the pie chart, that proportion of the total packaging market represents volumes of about 61 million tons. Some sources will give a slightly higher figure than that, maybe closer to 70 million. But that's where the sort of definitions can vary of what you include. So some of the larger numbers might include a broader range of end products like plastic pallets, for example, or maybe sort of shift the boundary in terms of whether semi-rigid packaging is included within rigid or not. So things like squeezy ketchup bottles and so on. And we do see areas of growth in the rigid plastic packaging market. But what I wanted to introduce here is the first of a few case studies we'll discuss today, which for me illustrates the big dilemma in the industry. And I'm sure most of you on the call today will be fully aware of that dilemma. Of course, what I'm referring to is the fact that you have two very different attempts to make the packaging industry more sustainable. And of course, everyone agrees that we need to see less packaging waste in the environment, either in landfill or just as pollution where it hasn't been disposed of responsibly. But on the one hand, many people still see the solution to be the elimination of all plastic packaging. But on the other hand, plastic packaging has many functional benefits, and all companies in the ecosystem are working to make it more sustainable too. Now, there are definitely challenges remaining in terms of implementation of a more sustainable plastic industry in the future. And just here in the UK, we've seen recently some plastic recycling plants shutting down. And so there are big challenges still ahead with the making this whole ecosystem work. But nevertheless, there are still good news stories that I think need to be celebrated. So even when we published that study, the Polymers in Rigid Packaging report last year, we ourselves were saying that one of the most interesting growth opportunities was still to look at where polystyrene is used and maybe look to replace that with an alternative polymer. And that's just what you can see on this slide here with the graphic. That's just an extract from the report. Polystyrene remains one of those polymers with a bit of a bad reputation in terms of recyclability. But if I move on, you'll see there are two examples here on this slide, both illustrating announcements that have come out since we published our report last year, and which do show how much progress is being made in creating a viable system to recycle polystyrene and to provide a market for second life material. So I personally am hopeful that despite the challenges I mentioned a moment ago, the industry will continue with developments such as these from Trinseo and from Versalis, and that people will come to realize that the functional benefits of plastic packaging are worth retaining as long as we can fix some of the end-of-life waste issues for the material. So that's just a little bit, as I said, on the rigid plastic packaging market that we worked on last year. What we're working on right now is a study on polymers in flexible packaging. We're nearly finished the report, so what I'm going to talk you through now are a few slides from the near finalized report, just with a few conclusions that we are drawing from our research. And what I really wanted to do today was to focus on the list of primary growth drivers that we've included in that research. Mostly because when I looked at them, what I saw was a really good illustration of this dilemma that I've been talking about, and in general, the dynamic between functionality and sustainability. So I'll talk through some of these drivers in turn now for you. The first one, as you can see, end markets are growing, and clearly in any packaging market, the first driver of growth of the market will be whether the end products themselves that go into the packaging are in a growing market. And with food and beverage being the largest single end market for plastic packaging, then the continued global growth in demand for food will, of course, increase the need for packaging. I think that's pretty clear. So just wanted to show that for a bit of context now, but we'll move on and discuss some of the other areas that you can see listed as drivers where there's more of an uncertain dynamic as we move into the future. So as you can see from the table, the research done by our analysts does suggest that a key growth driver for polymers and flexible packaging is the trend for people, mostly in developing economies, to have more disposable income and to favor more premium products when they are going and buying their food. So the question then is whether flexible plastic, the product we're talking about here, polymers and flexible packaging, can be seen as part of the solution of providing a premium food product to these consumers. And I actually wanted to illustrate that with an example from here in the UK, and it's one I'm seeing at the moment. The market for the products you can see on here, chickpeas, pulses in general, is going through a real transformation. As more people see them as a great meat-free source of protein, and with other sustainability benefits as well. I'm actually myself writing a report at the moment on the impact of the soil health megatrend for our nutrition and wellness program. And as we can see there, the growing demand for pulses is being viewed as a very sustainable way to improve soil health as well, because of what these plants do as they are growing in the soil. So anyway, to get back to the story of whether flexible plastic can be part of the sort of premium packaging solution in products like this. Traditional packaging for cooked pulses tends to be either the cans, like you can see on the top left, or the multi-material laminate blocks. I suspect that's SIG would have made that one down on the bottom left there. But the two brands that are sort of leading the resurgence of interest in high quality premium pulses are the ones on the right hand side here, Bold Bean Company and Merchant Gourmet. And as you can see, one of them has gone for glass for the packaging, and the other one has gone for flexible plastic. Now, at the moment, the Merchant Gourmet packs, the stand-up pouches, aren't very easy to recycle. If you go to the website, they say that you can put the packs in the post and send back to them for recycling, but I don't really think that's a viable long-term solution that consumers will want to do. But in contrast, I am seeing sustainable food brands in other sectors starting to use flexible packs that maybe weren't recyclable in the past, but are now and will be in the future. And that's something I'll pick up on more later on in the presentation. So, what we're just talking about were sort of benefits for consumers, and where flexible plastic can be part of what makes an end product look premium. Now, the other side of that is the technical benefits that are less important for consumers, but very important for producers of the product. And again, there's the same dynamic here. I wrote, you can see on this slide now, there's a LinkedIn post that I wrote a couple of years ago about Sainsbury's, which happens to be my local supermarket here in the UK. And they switched their meat packaging from a rigid plastic tray to it being vacuum packed in flexible plastic. Consumers initially did not like what this did for the products. Minced beef from a vac pack just doesn't look very nice. And I also personally saw it as a backward step, moving away from something that was recyclable to something that was not, just so that you can say that you've reduced the amount of plastic in your packaging. But more recently, I have seen environmental consultants being convinced that in the grand scheme of things, this sort of vac pack solution, even though it's not recyclable today, it is a more sustainable solution. You can get more of the packs in a truck, so you're reducing the carbon footprint of distribution. The shelf life of the product is longer, and there's less chance of the packs being broken in transit, all of which means there is less food waste as well. All we need to do now is make them recyclable. So when we look at all of the drivers that were listed on those slides there and factor them into where we think growth will come from here, this is the summary chart that will go into the report as to where we think that growth will come from for, as I said, polymers in flexible packaging. And as you can see on here, about half of the growth will come from the end markets themselves growing, and the other half will come from flexibles continuing to take market share from other solutions. But as I said on the previous slide, for that growth to be sustained, we do need to keep working on the recyclability of the product as well. So that's what I wanted to look at next. Now, this graphic here, this is how we illustrated the dynamic when we did a short dedicated report back in 2022 on multi-layer packaging film. We wanted to show that in order to solve the problem of multi-layer film not being recyclable, you kind of had three options. Option number one, you can change the film from something that, with the technology available at the time, change from something that wasn't recyclable to something that was. Option number two, you can improve recycling technology so that you can keep the same packaging, but in the future it will be recyclable because of that enhancement in the technology. But even if neither of those two things can be done, you can still do other things anyway to make the packaging more sustainable overall. The example we've given here being using recyclate to actually make that packaging from in the first place. So this was the picture that we drew in 2022, and at that time, this is what we were predicting. So sort of from a baseline, as you can see on the left, where multi-layer films were at that time not easily recyclable, we were predicting how much of the market might change according to those scenarios 1, 2, and 3. And you can see our prediction at that time was that the biggest area of change would be in changing the film, scenario 1, so shifting, say, from a multi-layer to a more recyclable structure. And I think if you remember one of the earlier slides when I was talking about chickpeas, I mentioned some other examples I had in mind. One is, for example, coffee beans. Again, brands like this one here. So this is Union Coffee Roasters here in the UK. Their pack used to be non-recyclable, but they changed it quite recently. And now their bags are made from fully recyclable LDPE. So that's a sort of prime example of this scenario 1 here, the film changing so that the packaging itself is inherently more recyclable. But other things have obviously changed since we wrote that report back in 2022 as well. So we've got a new view of the market now, which I'll overlay on to the slide there. And this, as you can see, is our new picture today. And what we're seeing is, I guess, more of an even split between changing the film and changing the recycling technology. So yes, changing the film, like the example I gave, that's definitely happened and will continue to happen. But we're now seeing more emphasis on changing the recycling technology than we had perhaps predicted might happen a few years ago. Part of us changing our view was inspired by what we saw when we wrote our report on chemical recycling, which we published in April this year. But also, we're seeing some interesting developments too in mechanical recycling as well. So, for example, there were new recyclability evaluation protocols announced by a company called Recyclast just last month, back in July. And these include guidelines on, for example, the recyclability of polyethylene film that has an EVOH layer on it. So what we're seeing is people now being able to say, yes, this is recyclable, when perhaps in the past, that same structure, we wouldn't have been able to say that it was recyclable. Now, of course, as we speak, there is a big meeting going on, INC 5.2 in Geneva, where there's an attempt to finalize an agreement on dealing with plastic pollution in the environment. I'm not there, unfortunately. And the latest news I've seen is that progress is happening, but it is slow. But clearly, this is an issue the world wants to solve. And as we continue to try and solve the sustainability and recyclability challenges of plastic, nevertheless, overall, we do see a very positive future for this sector. So just before we kind of conclude our presentation, the last slide I wanted to show on here is the sort of summary that we show of how this whole circular economy will be constructed for the polymer industry. And you can see the market I've been talking about, plastic and flexible packaging, in the blue rectangle in the center of the slide there, where you have a number of feedstock options feeding in at the top, and a number of end-of-life options coming out of the bottom of that graphic as well. So there will be a certain amount of downcycling that will continue, where packaging is recycled but goes to make something else, whether it be polyester textiles, etc. But obviously, increasingly, we want to move to a more circular economy where that material stays in the packaging industry itself. In addition to the growing use of bio-based resins that we'll hopefully see in the future as well. So I'll leave that slide just on the screen now for reference for everyone. But in terms of continuing the discussion, just for the last 5 or 10 minutes of today's webinar, to bring you, Anwesha, back into the discussion again, I guess we've got two sides here that we've talked about, which is the benefits for the supply side, so brand owners, etc., but also the benefits for consumers of what's happening and what their behavior might be. But on the brand owner side, we do see a lot of sustainability pledges coming out. But do you think those will actually translate into orders for example, circular plastics to make their packaging from?
Right. Yeah, that's a very important question, Brian, and that is something that manufacturers ask us all the time. As consultants and advisory team, we constantly get asked that question that uh, what is the premium that the consumers or the brand owners are actually willing to pay for something that is recycled or that is sustainable and has that kind of benefit. So that's a big question, and it really depends from industry to industry. A lot of brand owners in the FMCG side and in the food industry, they while they are willing to pay a premium, a lot of these sustainability benefits are also expected as a value addition by manufacturers. But there are pockets of opportunities. So, something that brand owners ask a lot today is LCA certifications as well, a value chain analysis. And that comes, of course, with a premium. In the medical industry, in industries which are under constant regulatory pressure, we do see there is a willingness to pay that premium for recycled products or um, all the products that have sustainability benefits. But in the more commoditized segments, the expectation is more on the value addition side of it rather than paying a premium for these products.
Thanks, Anwisha. So I'm just having a look in the Q&A box. So if anyone in the audience does have questions, do ask. We've seen one come in already, asking, is LDPE a sustainable material? Shouldn't we try to reduce LDPE and add more compostable bioplastic? Do you want to go first or second, Anwisha? I've certainly got my own opinion. Shall I go first, since you just put
Yes.
yourself on mute? I would say maybe 5 years ago, the view was that compostable bioplastics were the best future for the plastic industry. With what we've seen with recycling technology, that has definitely shifted. And then in the last couple of years, there has been a lot more interest in trying to focus on making plastic recyclable rather than bio-based or compostable. Yeah, I've done trials myself. I have a compost bin in my garden just outside my home office here. I have put bags of home compostable plastic into it, and after a year, the compost looks beautiful, but you have loads of bits of that plastic still, so it doesn't break down very well in a home composting environment. And let's face it, not everybody has a home composting bin either. What we would need to make more use of compostable material is for councils to make an agreement where compostable plastic would be allowed in food waste bins, so it would go and be composted with the food waste. Now, if I put out my food waste bin to the council and they saw plastic in it, they would probably reject it. But there are places in the world that are starting to do that much better. I think Italy is one country that's been much better at trying to integrate that whole system so that compostable plastics can feed into the industrial composting environment. But really, I think better to stick to materials that can be recycled rather than trying to move to compostable materials, unless having compostability has some other real benefit to it. We don't want plastic waste to end up in the environment. We don't want to make things compostable just in case someone throws it on the side of the street. We want things to be collected better and to be recycled. And yes, there are big challenges with building up that recycling infrastructure, but I think that's what we do need to do. Now, of course, you can make LDPE bio-based, so people like Braskem are really driving the development of using a bio-based feedstock to make LDPE, which is chemically identical to petrochemical LDPE, and which obviously then has no ramifications for the recycling because it's exactly the same material. It recycles in the same way. Whereas if you were to contaminate LDPE or PET end of life chains with a bio-based material like PEF or PLA, that could potentially have some very negative implications for the recyclability of that batch of material then. So yeah, bit of a rambling answer to the question from me. Anwesha, would you add anything to that?
No, I agree to that, Brian, that it's also like, when we talk about compostable bioplastics, like for example PLA or PBS, or any starch blends, that kind of requires also the industry, you know composting conditions, right, to break down and all. So it's not easy, and then they'll still end up in the landfill. So that's probably not the best thing as well. So yeah, I agree with you on that conventional plastics will continue.
Now, I think one of the areas where compostable plastic could have real benefits is in sort of catering environments where the plastic will be heavily contaminated with food waste at the end of its use. So the best way to
Yeah.
deal with that is to make that plastic, whether it's a plate or cutlery or whatever, just make it compostable along with the food that's on it, and then you can just deal with it in one single process. So yeah, to get back to our previous discussion, then we're talking about brand donor pledges, but in terms then of consumer behavior, if we just finish with that, and let me stop screen sharing at all, but many consumers talk about circular materials. I read a lot of magazines that emphasize the fact that a lot of people around the world want to live more sustainably, are increasingly wanting to care for the environment, but that doesn't always translate into them actually paying a premium for a product which is more sustainable. So what do you see as the future there?
Yeah, that is exactly what I was talking about, that the main question is that are the consumers willing to pay that premium? So we do a lot of the work that we do today is actually about collecting that insights from the consumers and the owners across industries to understand whether that price premium is an option, or is it just sort of value addition that they are expecting. And there are pockets of opportunities. There are pockets of opportunities in the automotive industry, in medical, but then overall, when we look at the commoditized grades, the expectation, it's supposed to be at par priced with the virgin material. So that's the kind of expectations that we see around.
Well, thanks, Anwesha. So I think just to summarize today's discussion before we wrap up, first of all, what do we see as our role in Frost & Sullivan in this whole dynamic of moving towards a more sustainable plastic industry in the future? We can produce market studies talking about where we see growth in the various markets. But I also see our role as being one where we can champion sustainable solutions. So whenever we see a sustainable solution, whether it be the polystyrene recycling technology that I mentioned from Trinseo earlier on, or the new pack from Union Coffee, and making plastic packaging more recyclable whilst still being functional, we can be part of what is getting the message out to consumers that there are great solutions out there. Plastic packaging has fantastic functional benefits. And if we can solve the sustainability challenges, it's a great material for the future as well. And as I said a minute ago, I read a lot of magazines now that talk about consumers wanting to be more sustainable. They just need educated on what exactly that would mean. How can they be more sustainable? What should they buy in order to be more sustainable? So I would just say any suppliers out there with what they consider to be a sustainable solution for the plastic packaging industry, let us know, and we're happy to shout about it and to incorporate it into the commentary and the research that we publish as well. And on that note, thank you everyone for attending the briefing today. Great to speak to you all. And if you have any questions for Anwesha or myself about what we've been talking about today or any of the studies I mentioned that we're working on, please do get in touch and we'd be happy to discuss that further with you.